Hello, you're listening to Pick of the Commonwealth, the programme that reports on political and cultural events throughout the Commonwealth. My name is Robin White. In this edition, civil war comes to the Sri Lankan capital Colombo. Xenophobia in South Africa leaves scores of immigrants dead and thousands homeless. We meet the new Commonwealth Secretary-General. He talks about himself and his plans for the organisation. A battle over a chain of hills in India. And this year's winner of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, a woman's account of the ghastly slave trade. The situation in Sri Lanka appears to be going from bad to worse. The civil war, which up to now had mostly affected the predominantly Tamil-populated areas of the north and east, is rapidly spreading to towns and villages in other parts of the country. Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, has itself seen several explosions in recent months. Bombs have been planted in buses and trains, leaving many dead and injured. Meanwhile, large numbers of people are mysteriously disappearing. From Colombo, Namini Wijadasa, deputy editor of the independent Lakbima newspaper, reports.
Every day, the death tolls are rising in Sri Lanka. Heavy fighting in the north and frequent bomb explosions elsewhere in the country are leaving people increasingly convinced that the violence will only get worse in coming months. The military vowed in an official statement earlier this year to wipe out the Tamil Tiger rebels by the end of 2008, but the militants are putting up a bitter fight. Late last month there was bloodshed in Colombo when an explosion ripped through the carriage of a train brimming with office workers. 9 people, including a pregnant woman, were killed and more than 84 wounded. Police said it had been caused by a parcel bomb that had quietly been left on the luggage rack of carriage number 5. The government blamed the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam and called it an act of cruelty against innocent civilians. President Mahinda Rajapaksa issued a biting statement, emphasizing that he remained committed to defeating terrorism. He said, "No one should have expectations that there will be a let-up in the battle against terrorism because of the frenzied attacks by the LTTE." May's train explosion was just one of many in recent weeks and months, all of them blamed on the LTTE. Bombs have been going off in buses, in trains, in crowded cafes, and by the side of popular roads. Many more have been defused after tip-offs from the public. Suicide bombers, presumed to be working for the LTTE, have been deployed to hit VIP targets like Highways Minister Jairaj Fernandopoulos, who was killed in April. TV and radio stations are repeatedly warning people to be on the lookout for suicide carders or suspicious parcels. The country's bomb disposal units are working overtime. It is in this war against terror that large numbers of civilians are said to be disappearing. Human Rights Watch said in a recent report that since major fighting resumed between the LTTE and government last year, Sri Lankan security forces and pro-government armed groups have abducted hundreds of individuals, many of whom are feared dead. According to Human Rights Watch, most of the victims are ethnic Tamils. It is a charge that the government roundly denies.
That was Namini Wijadasa reporting from the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo. South Africa's large immigrant community has been engulfed in violence. Rampaging xenophobic mobs have been driving Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, Malawians, Nigerians, Congolese out of their homes, accusing them of taking their jobs, their women and their livelihood. There have been scores of deaths and many thousands have fled for their lives. The South African Human Rights Commission has, over the past few years, been involved in a campaign to combat xenophobia. On the line to Johannesburg, I asked their spokesperson, Joyce Clou, if she'd been surprised at recent events.
I think we were surprised by the intensity, the brutality, the belligerence of the perpetrators. That's what kind of surprised us, and how quickly it actually spread all over the country.
Why is it that South Africans don't like foreigners?
Well, we will qualify that, and with all due respect, and it's not all South Africans, so it would be really unfair to generalize to say South Africans don't like foreigners. It is a minority, for that matter, who seem to resent foreigners. What we are getting from the ground is how people are frustrated with the lack of service delivery from government, and rather than take government head on, which they find hard to do, they are simply scapegoating the foreign nationals.
How do you think the government has handled the current situation?
With all due respect, I, as on behalf of the Human Rights Commission and speaking for myself as a member of the public, I am not at all impressed by the government response because right now there seems to be no national plan of action on dealing with what we are terming a national crisis and of such huge proportions. Instead, it has been NGOs, non-governmental organizations, the faith-based organizations, and other individuals and business that have gone in to alleviate a lot of the suffering. So we are not at this stage really impressed.
Do you think perhaps the government doesn't really care because immigrants don't have the vote?
Well, I would not be able to speak on what, why or how government, what government's feelings and thoughts are, but maybe that could be perhaps one reason, or it could just be a question of inertia, where people just dither and dally and take a while for them to realize the enormity of the situation, or not to even understand what their mandate is in terms of protection of non-nationals. Most government officials seem to think that they are there to save the South African citizens only, but our constitution indicates that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, and that is inclusive of foreign nationals.
What would your advice be to the immigrant population? Go back home, or what?
As the South African Human Rights Commission, we do not actually advocate for anyone to return home. That would be a total failure of protection that the country is supposed to guarantee foreign nationals. So we would not advocate for that.
Of course, thousands have already gone home. I think some 20,000 have already gone back to Mozambique.
Well, I do not have the exact numbers, but indeed some of the Mozambicans have, whether voluntarily or assisted, have returned home, and that is just a failure of our system. It's an indictment to say even if they are undocumented or illegally in the country, they still deserve the protection that we as a country are supposed to afford them.
That was Joyce Hlo of South Africa's Human Rights Commission speaking from Johannesburg.